It was never about the flight. It was about the flag, the one draped over the steel box waiting on the tarmac. Inside was a boy who'd never see 22, and standing between him and home was a man in uniform, being told he wasn't allowed to come aboard. The airport hummed with the low, constant thrum of 1,000 disconnected lives, a chorus of rolling bags, gate announcements, and weary sighs. Colonel Elias Vance moved through it like a stone through a river. His dress shoes, polished to a mirror finish, clicked a steady, somber rhythm against the floor. The weight on his shoulders wasn't just the uniform, it was the promise, the one they all made. No one gets left behind. Private Marcus Ellis was coming home, 19 years old, a life traded for a patch of foreign dust. Colonel Vance adjusted the brim of his hat, the gesture a silent prayer. His duty was a sacred chain, linking a fallen son to the weeping soil of his hometown. He approached the gleaming airline counter, placing his military orders and identification on the cool laminate. The agent, a woman with tired eyes behind thin glasses, scanned the documents. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. A flicker, a hesitation so brief it was almost invisible. Almost. "Sir," her voice was thin, reedy. "Can I see your ID again?" Vance handed it over, his dark eyes watching hers. He saw the sideways glance to a colleague, the subtle intake of breath, the unspoken language of a problem being discovered. She leaned away, whispering. The other agent looked over, his face a blank mask. The air at the counter grew thick, heavy. When she turned back, her smile was a brittle thing. "I'm sorry, Colonel. There's an issue with your reservation. We can't allow you to board." Vance exhaled, long and slow. He had stood in the path of insurgent fire. He had negotiated with men who spoke in lies and knives. But this sterile refusal in the heart of his own country, it was a different kind of battlefield. "I am escorting a fallen soldier," he said, his voice low, calm. He tapped the paperwork. "Everything is in order." She wouldn't meet his gaze. "I understand, sir. It's a security protocol. We can't override it." "What protocol?" Vance asked, the words steady. "It's just policy." Behind him, the line shifted. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A man in a business suit glanced at his watch. A mother hushed her child. They were all starting to watch. The uniformed soldier standing firm. The agents retreating behind their invisible wall of rules. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. The weight of the casket on the tarmac anchored him to that spot. "Ma'am," Vance said, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "I need to understand the specific issue. This is a military assignment. My documentation is valid and complete." Her eyes darted again, seeking rescue. From the back, a supervisor emerged, a man with thinning hair and the weary posture of someone who managed disappointments for a living. He adjusted his tie as he approached. "Colonel, apologies for the inconvenience," he began, the practiced placation oily in his voice. "We have certain procedures we must adhere to. Unfortunately, we cannot make an exception at this time." Procedures. The word hung in the air, empty and cold. Vance had heard it before in other places, from other people hiding behind jargon. "I've performed this duty 7 times, Vance stated. The heat of frustration banked deep beneath years of discipline. "I know the procedures. There is none that prevents this escort. So I'll ask plainly, what is the real reason I am being denied?" The supervisor cleared his throat, a wet, uncomfortable sound. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "It's an additional security layer, sir. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." Colonel Vance felt the irony like a physical blow. He held his silence, his jaw tight. He would not give them the outburst they needed. He would not become the angry black man in their narrative. But the crowd was writing a different story. A woman in a red coat whispered to her companion. A young man with headphones pulled one earpiece out, frowning. The energy was changing, charging. Then a voice, graveled and firm, cut from the heart of the line behind him. "You got a problem with his orders?" Vance turned his head just enough. A few people back stood an older black man. His face was a map of hard years, crowned by a cap bearing the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marines. His eyes, sharp and clear, were fixed on the supervisor. The supervisor's mask of calm cracked at the edges. "No, sir, this isn't about his orders. It's standard protocol." The Marine let out a short, derisive breath. "I've flown this airline for 20 years. Never seen protocol stop a soldier from bringing one of our boys home." He crossed his arms, his stance widening. "So, let's hear it. What's the real protocol?" A low murmur of agreement rustled through the waiting travelers. Phones, which had been held idly, began to rise. Screens flickered to life. The supervisor's eyes widened just slightly as he saw the lenses turning toward him. The agent behind the counter had gone very still. Colonel Vance remained a statue of resolve, but the ground was shifting beneath the airline's feet. The quiet terminal was no longer a background. It was an audience, and they were just starting to listen. The murmur wasn't background noise anymore. It was a current, electric and growing. The Marine veteran held his ground, his gaze a silent challenge. Colonel Vance felt the shift. This was no longer a private disagreement. It was a public moment, raw and unfolding in real time. The supervisor's mouth opened, then closed. He looked from the Marine to Vance, to the sea of faces now watching. Let me check on something," he finally muttered, the professionalism bleeding away into unease. He turned and walked briskly toward a frosted glass door, leaving the young agent alone at the counter. She stared at her computer screen, her fingers frozen above the keys. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The Marine took a step closer to the counter. "Ain't no system error," he said, loud enough for the growing circle of listeners to hear. "I know what I'm seeing." A middle-aged black woman in a denim jacket shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is shameful," she said, "not to anyone, but to everyone. Just shameful." Her husband beside her nodded, his hand finding hers. Then a softer voice, tentative but clear. "Excuse me." Vance turned. A young black woman, maybe mid-20s, stood a few feet away. She held her phone not as a shield, but like a tool. Her eyes were wide with a dawning understanding. "Are they not letting you on the plane?" she asked. "That's correct," Vance replied, his voice still that same calm, deep river. She blinked, swallowed hard. For a second, she seemed to war with herself, the instinct to look away versus the pull of a fundamental wrong. The decision settled in her shoulders. She squared them. I'm recording," she said, her voice gaining strength. She turned her phone screen slightly. "And I'm live. People should see this." It was the spark, the moment the private injustice met the public eye. "Yeah, me too," a man in a hoodie called out, holding his own phone aloft. "This is messed up. He's escorting a fallen soldier." "Hey," a woman further back shouted toward the counter, "can we get an actual explanation over here? A real one?" The agent behind the counter flinched. Her eyes, wide with a sudden panic, scanned the forest of raised phones. She was no longer just denying a boarding pass. She was starring in a story she didn't want any part of. The Marine veteran looked at the young woman who'd gone live, giving her a slow, firm nod of respect. He then addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "In all my years," he said, "I've seen disrespect. I've seen bureaucracy. But I never thought I'd see the day one of our own, in uniform, on sacred duty, was treated like a nuisance at his own homecoming." Silence fell, profound and heavy. The constant airport din, the garbled announcements, the squeak of luggage wheels faded into a distant haze. All that existed was this pocket of tension, charged with a collective held breath. Then a sound, a soft, disbelieving gasp from a man staring at his phone. It's already trending, look." The words spread through the crowd like a ripple. People looked down at their own devices, thumbs swiping, eyes scanning. "Twitter's blowing up," the man in the hoodie announced, a note of grim triumph in his voice. A woman near the windows turned, her face pale. It's on the news. One of the local affiliates just posted the clip. The agent behind the counter finally broke. With a shaky, almost frantic movement, she turned and nearly fled through the same door her supervisor had used. The counter was left unmanned, a stark, empty space where authority had just crumbled. Colonel Vance didn't smile. He didn't nod. Inside, he catalogued every detail, the fear on the staff's faces, the righteous anger in the crowd, the hum of the digital swarm descending. This was a different kind of mission success, but the primary objective was still unmet. Marcus Ellis was still waiting. The crowd's murmuring took on a new tone. It wasn't just anger now, it was anticipation. They had borne witness. They had applied pressure. Now they waited for the result. They were invested. The frosted glass door opened again. The supervisor returned, but his pace was different, slower, heavier. His face was ashen, and he was not alone. A new man walked beside him, cutting through the crowd with an air of manufactured authority. He wore a sleek, dark suit, an airline ID badge gleaming on his lapel. This was damage control, personified. His eyes, sharp and calculating, took in the scene. The colonel, the veteran, the dozens of recording phones. He painted on a conciliatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Colonel Vance," the suit said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone, "my deepest apologies. We've experienced a severe system malfunction, a regrettable error. We are rectifying it immediately and will personally ensure you are on the next flight out. First class, of course. First class." The words were an insult, a bribe offered in the currency of comfort, as if a wider seat could erase the principle that had just been violated. Vance let the silence stretch. He let the man's hollow words hang in the air, let the crowd absorb their emptiness. The suit shifted, his smile straining. Finally, Vance spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every ear. "I appreciate the urgency," he said, "but I need to understand something." He paused, his dark eyes locking onto the suited man's. "If these phones were down, if no one was watching, would I still be standing here?" A deafening quiet swallowed the terminal. The suited man's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The answer was written in the sweat on his temple, in the avoided gaze. The crowd knew. Colonel Vance knew. The truth, stark and ugly, was now the only thing in the room. The airline's facade had shattered, and they were all standing in the wreckage. The silence, after Colonel Vance's question, was a physical presence, thick and accusing. The suited airline representative stood frozen, his polished demeanor cracking under the weight of a truth he couldn't spin. He swallowed, the sound audible in the hush. "Sir, we truly regret any—" he stammered, his script failing him. From the crowd, a voice called out clear and firm, "He's right, you know." Heads nodded. Phones remained raised, recording the executive's discomfort. This was no longer about a boarding pass. It was about accountability, broadcast live. The suit straightened his tie, a feeble attempt to reclaim control. "Colonel, let's get you to your gate. We can discuss this in a more private—" "There is nothing private about respect," Vance interrupted. His voice still calm, but now edged with a flinty resolve. "Or the lack of it." He glanced toward the tarmac, unseen beyond the walls. "A young man is waiting for me to bring him home. That is the only discussion that matters." The representative's face tightened. He was a man used to containing messes, but this one was spreading faster than he could smother it. Then a new figure approached from the side, a young airport security officer, his expression grim. He held out a phone to the airline suit. "Sir," he said, his voice low but urgent, "you need to see this." The suit took the phone, his eyes scanning the screen. The color drained completely from his face. His hand trembled slightly. The Marine veteran took a step forward. "Problem?" The suit didn't answer. He just stared, transfixed by the device. On the screen, a major national news network was running a banner headline, "U.S. Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Airline under fire." Below it, a video loop played, the very scene from this terminal from just minutes ago. The story had escaped the airport. It was in the wild now. He handed the phone back as if it were hot, then turned to Vance, his previous oily composure replaced by a raw, panicked sincerity. "Colonel Vance, we will be issuing a full public apology. We will make this right." "The public," Vance said, nodding toward the phones, "already knows what right looks like. It looks like dignity. It looks like allowing a soldier to complete his final mission for a brother." He took a half step closer, his stature imposing even in its stillness. "I don't need first class. I need the principle that should have been automatic. The soldier I escort deserves that respect. His family deserves it." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. "That's it right there," the man in the denim jacket said, her voice thick with emotion. The airline representative was drowning and he knew it. He gave a stiff, jerky nod. "Understood. We will learn from this." But the lesson was arriving in a form he hadn't anticipated. All heads turned as a new man entered the concourse. He didn't walk. He moved with a purposeful, authoritative stride that parted the crowd without a word. He was black, dressed in the sharp, formal uniform of the U.S. Army, the brass on his shoulders catching the light. A major. He walked directly to Colonel Vance and snapped a crisp salute, which Vance returned with equal precision. The simple, silent military ritual cut through the chaos like a knife. "Colonel Vance," the major said, his voice firm and carrying, "Major Briggs, Joint Services Support, we've been apprised of the situation." He didn't even glance at the stunned airline representative. "Your mission is being reassigned. A military transport has been authorized and is being prepped now. You and Private Ellis will not be traveling commercial." A collective, audible exhale came from the onlookers. Some shook their heads in awe, others smiled, a grim satisfaction in their eyes. The cavalry hadn't just arrived, it had rendered the entire conflict obsolete. The airline representative found his voice a thin, reedy thing. "Major, sir, we were just about to accommodate." "You were just about to be too late," Major Briggs stated, his tone leaving no room for debate. He turned his full attention back to Vance. "Colonel, your vehicle is waiting curbside. We'll handle the transfer of the remains." Vance felt a complex wave of emotion, not triumph, but a solemn validation. The system, the right part of it, had finally engaged. "Thank you, Major." Briggs gave a single nod, then finally turned his gaze upon the suit. It was a cool, assessing look. "The Department of the Army will be in contact with your corporate office. This incident will be reviewed thoroughly." It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. The matter had been taken out of the airport's hands and placed into a much larger, more powerful machine. Vance turned to the Marine veteran. He extended his hand. The older man took it, his grip strong, calloused. "Thank you for speaking up," Vance said, the words heartfelt. "We look after our own," the Marine replied, his eyes glistening. "Always have, always will." Colonel Vance then did something he hadn't done since stepping into the terminal. He looked directly at the crowd, at the faces of the strangers who had refused to be bystanders. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of gratitude. No grand speech was needed. The connection was there, forged in shared witness. He adjusted his hat, squared his shoulders under the weight of his uniform and his duty, and followed Major Briggs toward the exit. He did not look back at the airline staff. But for the people of LostBlack who understand that our stories are often about the moments the world is forced to see us, this was only the end of the first act. The Colonel's mission was back on course. But for the airline, the real storm was just making landfall. Subscribe to LostBlack for stories where silence is broken and dignity must be fought for, one truth at a time. As the glass doors slid shut behind Colonel Vance, the terminal was left in a buzzing, unsettled quiet. The crowd lingered, phones still out, discussing what they'd just seen. The airline representatives had vanished behind their frosted glass. The battle at the counter was over, but a war of reputation, of public trust, and of simple human decency was now declared on a national stage. And the first shots had been fired by ordinary people who simply decided to look, to record, and to care. The silence in the terminal after Colonel Vance left was not peaceful. It was the loud, ringing quiet after a bell has been struck. People slowly lowered their phones, but the energy remained, a shared, simmering indignation. They had been part of something. They had witnessed a line being crossed, and they had collectively pushed back. The airline counter stood as an empty monument to the failure. The suited representative and the supervisor had disappeared, retreating to some back office to craft statements that would inevitably ring hollow. The young agent who had first denied Vance was gone, likely shaken to her core. The Marine veteran watched the exit for a long moment, then let out a slow, tired breath that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Never should have happened," he said to no one and everyone. He turned and melted back into the flow of travelers, a solitary figure of quiet principle. But the story didn't leave with the colonel. It had been digitized, uploaded, and set loose into the world's bloodstream. In the hours that followed, the incident didn't fade. It metastasized. On social media, the hashtag #LetHimEscort began climbing. The raw, shaky phone footage from the terminal was spliced, edited, reposted. It was raw, it was real, and it tapped directly into a deep vein of public sentiment about respect, sacrifice, and institutional failure. News anchors on cable networks discussed it with grave faces. A breakdown of protocol, or something more insidious? One asked, the video playing on a loop over her shoulder. Veterans organizations, powerful and networked, released swift, scathing statements. "This is an affront to every service member, past and present," read one from a prominent legion. "We demand a full investigation and accountability from the airline." By evening, politicians began to weigh in. A senator from a state with a large military population tweeted, "The treatment of Colonel Vance is unacceptable. Our heroes deserve better than bureaucratic indifference. We are watching." The airline's social media channels were flooded. Comment sections turned into rivers of outrage. "How do you sleep at night?" one post read. "My grandfather served. I'm canceling my family's vacation with you," read another. Customer service lines jammed. The next morning, the financial markets delivered their verdict. When the stock exchange opened, the airline's share price didn't dip. It stumbled. A 3% drop in the first hour of trading, a tangible value erased by intangible anger and lost trust. In a corporate headquarters hundreds of miles away, emergency meetings were convened. Lawyers spoke in low, urgent tones. PR teams scrambled, drafting and redrafting apologies that sounded more defensive than remorseful. They settled on a strategy: containment and calculated concession. Late that afternoon, the airline's CEO, a man with a carefully managed public image, appeared in a staged video from his office. He looked solemn, his hands folded on a mahogany desk. "To Colonel Vance, to the family of Private Ellis, to every member of our armed forces, and to the public," he began, his eyes fixed on the camera. "We offer our profound and sincere apologies. What occurred was a severe failure in both our systems and our judgment. It does not reflect our values." He called it a regrettable misunderstanding, a phrase that immediately sparked a new wave of derision online. "A misunderstanding requires a conversation," one commentator wrote. This was a denial. The CEO continued, delivering the sacrificial offering. "The employees involved have been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full review. We are overhauling our protocols to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." It was meant to be the closing note, the act of contrition to stop the bleeding. It was too little, far too late, because while the CEO was speaking, legal papers were being finalized. A coalition of military legal advocacy groups, armed with the viral video and a mountain of public testimony, filed a formal federal complaint against the airline. The charges were specific: discrimination based on military status, violation of Service Member Civil Relief Act principles, and creating a hostile environment for a uniformed escort performing a federally sanctioned duty. The lawsuit didn't just seek damages. It sought a court-mandated change in policy, public training audits, and a formal legal admission of wrongdoing. It was a structural attack, aimed at the foundation, not just the symptom. Meanwhile, far from the boardrooms and court filings, Colonel Elias Vance completed his mission. A military cargo plane, sterile and efficient, carried him and Private Marcus Ellis home. There was no first-class cabin, no in-flight service. There was only the solemn hum of engines and the silent flag-draped caskets secured in the bay. They landed on a quiet airstrip near Private Ellis's hometown. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows. A small official detail was waiting, along with a hearse and a family, shattered and brave, standing beside two sedans. Vance oversaw the transfer with meticulous care. He saluted as the young soldier's remains were gently moved from the plane. He then walked over to the family, a mother whose face was a mask of grief, a father standing rigid, holding his wife upright, younger siblings confused and crying. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Ma'am, sir, on behalf of a grateful nation and of all who served with him, I return your son to you. He is home." The mother's knees buckled, but she did not fall. Her husband held her tighter. She looked at Vance, her eyes searching his face, looking for some piece of her boy in this stranger who brought him home. She found no answers, only shared sorrow. "Thank you," the father whispered, the words ripped from somewhere deep and broken, "for bringing him home." Vance nodded, the weight of the journey, of the airport, of the fight, settling onto him now as a deep, bone-level fatigue. But it was a clean weight. The mission was complete. The promise was kept. He stood back as the family surrounded the hearse, their hands touching the flag, their tears falling on the vinyl roof. He did not need headlines. He did not crave the spotlight that now followed his name. In this quiet field, far from the noise, he had what he'd fought for at that airport counter, the uncomplicated respect owed to the fallen, the dignified completion of a sacred task. But as he watched the hearse pull away slowly toward a small church in the distance, he knew the other fight, the one about why it had ever been difficult, was just beginning for others. And that was a fight that needed more than soldiers. It needed witnesses. It needed people who refused to let disrespect hide in plain sight. People like you, who understand the power of stories like these on LostBlack. The colonel got into a waiting staff car, the dust from the hearse still hanging in the still air. For him, the story faded into the quiet honor of duty done. But back in the world of noise and commerce, the airline was just starting to comprehend the true cost of that system error. The lawsuit was a looming specter, their stock price a daily reminder, and their reputation was now permanently stained with a story they could never fully erase. A story about a colonel, a casket, and a counter where America decided enough was enough. The fallout was a slow, relentless tide, and no corporate press release could hold it back. The airline's regrettable misunderstanding line became a punchline, a symbol of empty corporate speak. Late-night talk show hosts cracked jokes about their new boarding policy for heroes. Memes circulated, pairing the CEO's somber video with captions like, "Our bad, we thought the flag was a carry-on." But the real damage was less visible and more profound. Trust, once fractured, is a delicate thing to rebuild. Travel blogs and forums popular with military families began actively advising against booking with the airline. "Choose a carrier that respects your service," became a common refrain. The lawsuit progressed, its legal language dry, but its intent fiery. Depositions were scheduled. The plaintiff's lawyers subpoenaed internal emails, training manuals, and records of past incidents. They weren't just looking for a settlement, they were building a case to force systemic change, to make an example. Weeks later, a settlement was indeed reached quietly before it could go to a public trial. The terms were not fully disclosed, but the reporting indicated it was substantial. More importantly, the airline was required to implement a new, nationally recognized training program for all customer-facing staff on the rights and protocols for traveling military escorts and human remains. An independent auditor would review their compliance for 3 years. The message was clear: your ignorance is no longer an excuse. For Colonel Elias Vance, life returned to the structured rhythm of military service. There were no parades for him, no interviews. He declined them all. The viral fame was a ghost that sometimes followed him, a nod from a stranger in an airport, a quiet "thank you for your service" that held more weight than usual. He accepted it with the same quiet grace he'd shown at the counter. He often thought of Private Marcus Ellis. He thought of the family's faces in that field. That was the real story, the one that mattered. The airport was just noise on the frequency of a greater duty. But he also thought of the Marine veteran, the young woman who went live, the man in the hoodie, the murmuring crowd that grew into a chorus. They were civilians. They owed him nothing. Yet they had stood as a shield when an institution failed. That was a powerful, humbling truth. One afternoon, Vance received a plain manila envelope at his office. Inside was no letter, just a simple framed photograph. It was a picture taken from within the crowd that day, showing him standing at the counter, squared against the airline staff. The focus, however, was on the people behind him. Their faces set in determination, their phones held high. Someone had written on the mat in silver ink, "The audience that would not look away." He placed it on a shelf in his study, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that justice isn't always a grand verdict from a high court. Sometimes it's the collective, simmering refusal of ordinary people to accept a wrong that is happening right in front of them. It's the moment a private insult becomes a public reckoning. The airline eventually moved on, as corporations do. New scandals emerged in the news cycle, but their name remained forever tagged in countless articles and videos about brand failures and PR disasters. For a generation of travelers, especially those in uniform or those who loved someone who served, the stain was permanent, a silent, personal boycott born of principle. The story of Colonel Vance at the counter became a modern folktale, a cautionary one. It was told in barracks and at VFW halls, not just as a tale of disrespect, but as a tale of remedy. See what happens when we all pay attention? And that is the dark human heart of this story for LostBlack. It's not just about the pain of prejudice, which is a story we know too well. It's about the medicine that sometimes exists for it. That medicine isn't always a law or a lawsuit first. It's a gaze. It's a raised phone. It's a voice clear in a crowded room asking, why? Respect shouldn't have to be a battle. Dignity shouldn't require a viral campaign. But when those things are withheld, as they so often are in the shadows of everyday life, the only counterforce is light. The light of witness, the light of shared outrage, the light of a community, even a temporary one formed in an airport terminal, saying no more. This is why we tell these stories on LostBlack, to practice that gaze, to strengthen that voice. Because in the dark, emotional fabric of real African-American life, these aren't just plots, they are possibilities. They show us that while the wrong might be systemic, the correction can be human, immediate, and powerful. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of looking, of speaking up, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to LostBlack. Join a community that believes our stories, the dark, the painful, the triumphant, are worth seeing through to the end. Your attention is the first act of justice. Don't ever underestimate it. Because silence is where disrespect grows, but in the light of a shared story, it has nowhere to hide. And the next time someone tries to turn a sacred duty into a bureaucratic hurdle, maybe, just maybe, the crowd will be ready a little sooner. The phones will be up a little faster, and the quiet colonel at the counter will know he's not standing alone.